Sarah Mitchell clutched her worn leather purse tighter as she stepped through the gilded doors of Lumière, the city's most exclusive French restaurant. With only $5 crumpled to her name, she smoothed down her faded dress, praying her blind date wouldn't order anything too expensive, unaware that every nervous gesture was being observed by Marcus Chen, the restaurant's billionaire owner, who sat concealed in a private corner booth. For 2 years since his wife's death, Marcus had been watching these blind dates unfold, searching desperately for something he'd lost, testing strangers for authenticity in a world that had become hollow. Neither of them knew that this evening, born from Sarah's courage and Marcus's grief, would shatter both their worlds and rebuild them into something neither dared to dream possible. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. 26 years old, and Sarah Mitchell had already lived a lifetime of sacrifice. The alarm clock on her nightstand read 5:30 in the morning. When she dragged herself from bed, her body aching from yesterday's shift at the diner, her hands still raw from scrubbing floors at the office building, her voice hoarse from tutoring teenagers in mathematics until nearly midnight. 3 jobs, 3 ways to keep the lights on, and her mother's medications flowing. She stood before the cracked mirror in their tiny apartment, studying the young woman who looked back at her with tired eyes that still held a spark of something unbreakable. Her mother, Margaret, slept fitfully in the next room, her breathing labored, each exhale a reminder of the medical bills stacking up like snow in winter. Sarah opened her wallet, counting the contents for the 3rd time that morning. $5. 5 single bills that represented the absolute sum of her disposable income until next Friday's paycheck from the diner. The blind date invitation on her phone screen mocked her. Brad Hamilton, 29, financial analyst. The restaurant he'd chosen, Lumière, had glowing reviews and prices that made her stomach clench. She should cancel. She should stay home. But loneliness was its own kind of hunger, and Sarah hadn't felt the warmth of genuine human connection in so long that even the possibility of it drew her forward like a moth to flame. She pulled her best dress from the closet, navy blue with small flowers, purchased 3 years ago from a thrift store for a job interview. The fabric had thinned at the elbows. The hem had been repaired twice, but she pressed it carefully, ran her fingers through her honey blonde hair, and made a decision. She would go. She would hold her head high. She would offer what she had, even if it was almost nothing, because her mother had taught her that dignity wasn't measured in dollars but in the courage to show up as yourself. The bus ride downtown cost $2. She watched the city transform through the smudged window. From her neighborhood of crumbling brick and corner stores to gleaming towers of steel and glass, Lumière sat nestled on the corner of 5th and Madison, its French name glowing in elegant gold script above doors that seemed to whisper that people like Sarah didn't belong. She stood on the sidewalk for a full minute, watching well-dressed couples glide through those doors like they owned the world. Her reflection in the window showed her the truth. Worn dress, scuffed shoes, a purse held together with hope, and a safety pin. She took a breath that tasted like fear and courage mixed together. Then Sarah Mitchell walked inside. The interior of Lumière was a cathedral of wealth and taste. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls from vaulted ceilings, casting prismatic light across tables draped in ivory linen so pristine they seemed to glow. The air hummed with the soft murmur of privileged conversation, the delicate clink of sterling silver against bone china, the whisper of sommelier recommendations, and 7-course tasting menus. Oil paintings in gilded frames adorned walls covered in silk, damask, the color of aged wine. Every surface gleamed. Every detail whispered exclusivity. In the far corner, hidden behind a velvet curtain in a private booth designed for observation rather than participation, sat Marcus Chen, 38 years old, with the kind of wealth that appeared in Forbes lists and charity galas. He had the sharp features of his Chinese heritage, softened only by the perpetual sadness that lived behind his dark eyes. His tailored suit cost more than most people's monthly rent. His watch could have paid for a year of college tuition. But none of it meant anything anymore. Not since Emma, her name still caught in his throat like broken glass. Emma Chen, formerly Emma Rodriguez. The woman who had laughed at his terrible jokes and challenged his cynicism and made him believe that goodness existed in the world. They had met at a farmer's market on a Sunday morning, both reaching for the same bunch of sunflowers. She had been a teacher. He had been a workaholic building his restaurant empire. She taught him that life happened in the small moments, the shared meals, the unexpected kindnesses. Then a drunk driver ran a red light on a rainy Tuesday evening, and Emma was gone, and Marcus learned that the world was exactly as cruel as he'd always suspected. For 2 years now, he had sat in this booth on Friday and Saturday evenings, watching the blind dates that unfolded in his restaurant. He had created a profile on the same app, marking Lumière as his preferred venue, watching strangers perform their rehearsed versions of themselves. He was searching, though he couldn't name what for. Proof that Emma had been wrong? Evidence that everyone was just as hollow and transactional as his grief told him? Then the door opened, and Sarah walked in. Marcus straightened involuntarily. Something about the way she moved, tentative but determined. The way her fingers worried at the strap of her worn purse. The way she looked at the opulence around her, not with envy, but with a kind of quiet wonder. She didn't belong here. That much was obvious. But there was a gentleness in her face, a softness in her eyes that hadn't been hardened by the world she clearly struggled against. Emma had looked at him that way once, before he built walls, before money became his language. Marcus leaned forward, his untouched glass of scotch forgotten. Tonight might be different. Brad Hamilton arrived 14 minutes late, and somehow made it seem like Sarah should apologize for his tardiness. He was handsome in the way that men who spend hours at the gym and equal time on their appearance tend to be, with perfectly styled dark hair, a jaw that could have been carved from marble, and a charcoal suit that screamed investment banker even before he mentioned it. His eyes swept over Sarah in a single dismissive glance that lasted no more than 2 seconds but communicated volumes. She saw the moment he registered her thrift store dress, her scuffed shoes, the way her purse sat on the table because she was afraid to hang it on the chair where it might fall apart. His smile flickered, becoming something plastic and obligatory. Sarah stood to greet him, her hand extended, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had practiced this moment in front of her bathroom mirror. Confident handshake, warm smile, natural conversation. But her palms were sweating. And when Brad's hand barely touched hers before pulling away, as if contact itself was distasteful, she felt something inside her crumble. Saturday, Brad immediately flagged down a waiter, ordered a bottle of wine that Sarah couldn't even pronounce, never once asking if she wanted any. From his hidden vantage point, Marcus watched the interaction unfold with growing distaste. He had seen 1,000 Brad Hamiltons walk through his doors, men who measured worth in stock portfolios and designer labels, who treated service staff like furniture and dates like acquisitions to be evaluated. But what made Marcus's jaw tighten was the way Brad looked at Sarah. That particular brand of contempt reserved for those deemed beneath notice. The waiter arrived with menus bound in leather. Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she opened hers, her eyes widening at the prices. The cheapest appetizer was $18. The entrees started at $45. Her $3 remaining couldn't buy a side salad. Brad didn't look at his menu, instead launching into a monologue about his latest merger, his corner office, his vintage car collection. Sarah listened, nodding at appropriate moments, trying to find an opening to speak, to connect, to justify why she had come here despite knowing it was impossible. When the waiter returned, Brad ordered the lobster and filet mignon combination without hesitation. Then he looked at Sarah with barely concealed impatience. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Just water, please. And maybe the house salad. No dressing." Brad's eyebrow arched. "That's it?" His tone suggested she had committed some sort of social violation. Sarah's cheeks flushed. "I had a late lunch." The lie tasted bitter. Marcus set down his scotch with deliberate control. He had seen enough of these performances to know exactly how this evening would unfold. But something about Sarah's quiet dignity, the way she refused to explain or justify herself beyond that simple lie, made him lean forward. This woman was trying so hard to maintain her grace, and Brad Hamilton had no idea what he was in the presence of. The evening deteriorated like fruit left in the sundae. Brad's phone emerged from his pocket exactly 7 times in the first 20 minutes, each glance at the screen lasting longer than any look he gave Sarah. He scrolled through messages while she spoke. His attention a gift he clearly felt no obligation to bestow. Sarah tried anyway. She asked about his work, his interests, the things that made him passionate about life. His answers came in clipped sentences, saturated with self-importance. He described deals in numbers so large they were abstractions, dropped names of clients she would never meet, painted himself as the protagonist in every story where others were merely supporting characters. When Sarah mentioned that she worked at a diner, Brad's expression shifted into something between amusement and pity. A waitress. He said it like a diagnosis. How quaint. The word landed like a slap. Sarah's spine straightened almost imperceptibly. She worked 3 jobs, not 1. But she said nothing, refusing to defend herself to a man who had already decided her worth. The wine arrived, a bottle that cost more than Sarah's weekly grocery budget. Brad poured himself a generous glass without offering her any. He swirled it, inhaled dramatically, made a show of his sophisticated palate. Sarah sipped her water and watched him perform. From the shadows, Marcus felt his hands curl into fists. He had built this restaurant as a tribute to Emma, to her belief that food and hospitality could create moments of genuine human connection. Watching Brad Hamilton treat another person with such casual cruelty in this space, Emma's space, made something dark and protective rise in his chest. Brad leaned back in his chair, his food untouched, while Sarah's meager salad sat before her. "So, what exactly are you hoping to get out of this?" His question dripped with implication. Sarah met his eyes steadily. "I thought I might meet someone kind." Brad laughed. Actually laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "Kind doesn't pay the bills, sweetheart. You should be more realistic about your prospects." The condescension in his voice was thick enough to choke on. Sarah's hands folded carefully in her lap, hiding their trembling. She had known poverty her entire life, had worn second-hand clothes and counted pennies, and gone to bed hungry more times than she could remember. But no one had ever made her feel small because of it. Not like this. Not with such deliberate cruelty. "I should go." Her voice was quiet but firm. Brad waved dismissively. "Don't be so sensitive. I'm just being honest." Marcus stood from his booth, his decision crystallizing. This had gone far enough. The waiter arrived with a check. A small leather folder placed discreetly beside Brad's plate. Brad glanced at it, then patted his pockets with theatrical confusion. His hand went to his jacket, then his pants. His expression shifting into what might have been embarrassment if Sarah hadn't seen the calculation in his eyes. "Oh no." He shook his head, a smile playing at his lips. "You're not going to believe this, but I completely forgot my wallet. Left it in my other jacket." The lie was so transparent it was almost insulting. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. The check sat between them like an accusation. The total, visible, even upside down. $147 for his lobster, his steak, his overpriced wine. Her $8 salad was a footnote. Brad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, waiting. "Well, can you cover it?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Sarah's hands moved to her purse with the mechanical slowness of someone walking toward their own execution. She opened it, the clasp clicking loudly in the sudden silence between them. Inside, nestled against her house keys and a worn tube of chapstick, were 5 single-dollar bills. She took them out, her fingers steady despite the shame burning through her veins, and placed them on the table beside the check. "This is all I have." Her voice didn't waver. The words were simple, factual, stripped of everything except truth. Brad stared at the $5, then at Sarah, then threw his head back and laughed. The sound was ugly, cutting through the refined atmosphere of Lumière like breaking glass. "Oh my God!" You came to a place like this with $5? He leaned forward, his eyes bright with malicious amusement. What were you thinking? That I'd be your meal ticket? That some desperate guy would be so grateful for your company he'd foot the bill? Sarah's face remained composed, but Marcus saw the slight tremble in her shoulders, the way her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Brad wasn't finished. This is priceless. I go on one blind date and end up with a charity case. Let me guess, you're going to cry now? Play the victim? Make me feel bad? He shook his head, standing abruptly. Good luck with that. Find some other sucker to fund your champagne taste on a beer budget. He turned to leave, and that was when Marcus Chen rose from his booth, his 6-foot frame unfolding with barely contained fury. His jaw was set, his eyes dark with something that Emma would have recognized, the protective rage of a man who had watched cruelty inflicted on someone who deserved none of it. Pierre, the head waiter, saw his employer emerge and immediately straightened, reading the storm in Marcus's expression. Brad Hamilton was halfway to the door. Sarah sat alone at the table, her $5 still lying there like an offering. And Marcus made a choice. Sarah's voice stopped Brad before he reached the door, quiet, but clear enough to carry across the hushed dining room. I came because I thought you might be kind. The words were simple, without accusation or anger, just a statement of what she had hoped for and what she had found absent. Brad turned, his face twisted with contempt. But Sarah wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at the $5 on the table, at the check beside it, at the physical representation of her impossible situation. She picked up the bills with steady hands and placed them carefully on top of the leather folder. I know this doesn't cover it. Her voice remained calm, that same unshakable dignity that had carried her through a lifetime of hardship rising to meet this moment. But I wanted to come anyway. To meet you. To try. She looked up at Brad then, and there was no shame in her eyes. Only a profound sadness for both of them. Maybe I was foolish. Maybe I should have stayed home. But I believe that kindness is worth more than money, and connection matters more than expensive meals. Brad's laugh was sharp and bitter. You're delusional. He shook his head, buttoning his jacket with aggressive precision. Enjoy explaining this to the staff. I'm sure they'll love hearing about your philosophy while you wash dishes to pay off my lobster. He walked out, the gilded door swinging shut behind him with a whisper of finality. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Several nearby diners had noticed the commotion, their curiosity poorly disguised behind raised menus and whispered conversations. Sarah sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, her $5 sitting on top of a bill she could never pay. The weight of it crashed over her all at once. The humiliation, the impossibility, the bone-deep exhaustion of trying so hard to keep her head above water, only to drown anyway. A single tear slipped down her cheek, followed by another. She didn't make a sound, didn't sob or gasp or call attention to her breaking. She simply sat there, alone at a table set for two, crying silently while crystal chandeliers cast rainbow light across her shoulders, and the $5 she had offered in good faith mocked her from the tablecloth. Marcus watched from across the room, his heart constricting in a way it hadn't since Emma died. He had seen enough. More than enough. Pierre Dubois had worked at Lumière for 12 years, long enough to recognize the particular kind of suffering that came from wounded dignity rather than wounded pride. He approached Sarah's table with the gentle deliberation of someone approaching a frightened bird, his silver hair catching the light, his expression kind in the way that only comes from decades of witnessing human nature at its best and worst. He carried no judgment in his posture, only compassion. Mademoiselle. His French accent softened the word into something almost musical. The bill has been taken care of. Sarah looked up, her tear-stained face confused, her eyes red-rimmed but still holding that remarkable composure. She wiped her cheeks quickly with the back of her hand. I don't understand. Pierre smiled, a small, knowing smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Sometimes kindness finds us when we need it most. The meal is covered. You owe nothing. The words didn't make sense. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. Did Brad come back? Did someone make a mistake? She opened her mouth to protest, to explain that there must be some error. But Pierre raised a gentle hand. "There is no mistake. Please, you are free to go whenever you are ready." Relief and confusion and gratitude crashed over Sarah in waves that left her breathless. She didn't know who had done this, or why. But the weight that had been crushing her chest suddenly lifted enough to let her breathe. "Thank you." The words were inadequate for what she felt, but they were all she had. Then her eyes fell on the $5 still sitting on the table, and something shifted in her expression. "Wait." She picked up the bills, smoothing them carefully, and held them out to Pierre. "Please, I'd like to leave this as a tip. For you and the staff. It's not much, but it's what I have." Pierre's professional composure faltered. In his 12 years at Lumière, he had received tips that could pay a month's rent, handed over carelessly by people who would never miss the money. But these 5 precious dollars from a woman who clearly needed every penny, offered not out of obligation but genuine gratitude, moved him in a way that made his throat tight. "Mademoiselle, that is not necessary. I insist." Sarah's voice was firm now, her dignity restored by the mysterious act of kindness. "You've all been so kind. Please." Pierre took the $5 with the reverence one might show a priceless artifact. He would remember this moment for the rest of his life. From his booth, Marcus watched the exchange and felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. Marcus Chen stood frozen behind the velvet curtain, watching Sarah place those $5 in Pierre's hand. And suddenly he was somewhere else entirely. 7 years ago, a different restaurant. One he didn't own yet. Before the empire and the wealth had insulated him from the world. He had taken Emma there for their 3rd date, already half in love with her, already terrified of losing her. The meal had been expensive, perhaps too expensive for a teacher's salary, but Emma had insisted on splitting the bill. When it came time to leave, Marcus watched her count out her portion with the same careful precision Sarah had just shown. Then Emma had done something he would never forget. She took her last $20 bill, the one that should have covered her bus fare home for the week, and left it as a tip for their waiter. A young man who had mentioned he was saving for his daughter's birthday. Marcus had protested. Emma had simply smiled. That radiant smile that made the world seem like a kinder place than it was, and said words that became her epitaph in his heart. "Kindness costs nothing, but means everything." He had driven her home every day that week. 3 months later, he proposed. Now, watching Sarah through vision blurred by tears he refused to shed, Marcus heard Emma's voice as clearly as if she were standing beside him. This woman, this stranger who had nothing and gave it anyway, who maintained her dignity in the face of cruelty, who believed that human connection mattered more than money. Emma would have loved her. More than that, Emma would have told him not to let this moment pass, not to retreat back into his grief and his observation and his passive watching of life through restaurant windows. Marcus made a decision that felt like waking from a long sleep. He needed to know who Sarah Mitchell was, where she came from, why she had that particular kind of strength that only comes from surviving storms that would break lesser people. He stepped out from behind the curtain, Pierre catching his eye and nodding with understanding. Marcus moved toward the entrance, grabbing his coat from the back office, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't since Emma died. Through the tall windows he saw Sarah push through the gilded doors into the night. He followed. The rain began the moment Sarah stepped onto the sidewalk, as if the universe had decided her evening hadn't been humiliating enough. Fat drops fell from a sky that had been clear just hours before, splattering against the pavement and turning the city lights into watercolor smears of gold and red. Sarah had no umbrella. Of course, she didn't. Umbrellas were for people who had the luxury of preparing for storms rather than simply enduring them. She wrapped her thin cardigan tighter around her shoulders and walked toward the bus stop 3 blocks away, her worn shoes splashing through puddles that soaked through to her skin. By the time she reached the shelter, she was drenched, her hair plastered to her face, her dress clinging to her frame. She checked the bus schedule posted on the rain-streaked plastic, 23 minutes until the next one. She sat on the cold metal bench and let the exhaustion wash over her. The black sedan that pulled up to the curb was expensive but understated, the kind of vehicle that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. The passenger window rolled down, and Sarah saw a man leaning across the seat, his face partially shadowed but his eyes kind. "You look like you could use a ride." His voice was deep, cultured, with an accent that suggested both privilege and something else. Something earned rather than inherited. Sarah shook her head, managing a small smile despite everything. "That's kind of you. But I'm fine. Thank you. The rain is getting worse." Marcus gestured at the sky, which seemed determined to prove his point. "Please, I promise I'm not a serial killer. Just someone who hates seeing people wait in the rain." There was something in his tone, a gentleness that reminded Sarah of her father before he passed, that made her hesitate. She studied his face, looking for the telltale signs of ulterior motives, but found only genuine concern. "I don't even know your name." "Marcus." He extended his hand through the window. "And you are?" "Sarah." She didn't take his hand. "Not yet. Do you work around here, Marcus?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I do. Hospitality industry." "And you?" "3 jobs." Sarah's laugh was tired. "Diner waitress, office cleaner, math tutor. Keeps me busy." Marcus's expression shifted into something softer. "That's a lot." She shrugged. "It's life." The rain intensified, drumming on the bus shelter roof like urgent fingers. Sarah looked at the empty street, at this stranger offering kindness when the world had offered her cruelty, and made a choice that felt both dangerous and necessary. "Okay. Just to my apartment. Nothing more." Marcus unlocked the door. "Nothing more." Sarah settled into the passenger seat, her wet clothes leaving marks on the leather that made her wince with guilt. The car's interior was warm, almost too warm after the cold rain, and smelled faintly of cedar and something expensive she couldn't name. Marcus pulled away from the curb smoothly, his hands steady on the wheel. And for a moment they drove in comfortable silence, broken only by the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers. The question came gently, without pressure. "Rough night?" Sarah laughed, the sound hollow. "You could say that." "Blind date." She didn't elaborate, but Marcus heard the weight behind those 2 words. The hope that had been crushed. The dignity that had been tested. They passed through intersections where traffic lights turned the rain into falling rubies and emeralds. Sarah watched the city slide by. This place where she had lived her entire life but never quite belonged, and found herself speaking truths she hadn't planned to share. "My mother is sick." The words emerged quietly, almost surprised to be spoken aloud. "That's why I work so much. 3 jobs." She ticked them off not with bitterness but simple factuality. "Morning shift at Rosie's Diner on 5th, 5 in the morning until noon. Then I clean offices downtown, noon until 6. Evening tutoring sessions, 7 until whenever the last student finishes, usually around 11. She turned to look at Marcus, this stranger who had shown her more kindness in 10 minutes than Brad had in an hour. "I sound like I'm complaining." "I'm not. I'm grateful to have the work." Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What's wrong with your mother?" "If you don't mind my asking." "Chronic heart condition." Sarah's voice remained steady, but Marcus heard the tremor beneath it. "She needs surgery. We're saving for it. The medical bills are substantial, and insurance doesn't cover enough. We're getting there. Slowly. But we're getting there." There was no self-pity in her words, no plea for sympathy, just the quiet determination of someone who had learned that survival meant putting one foot in front of the other, regardless of how impossible the path seemed. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, some sealed chamber, where he had locked away his capacity to be moved by another person's struggle. This woman worked 18-hour days, sacrificed everything for her mother, got humiliated by someone who couldn't see her worth. And still she spoke of gratitude. Still she had left her last $5 as a tip. They pulled up to a building that had seen better decades. Its brick facade water-stained and weary. Windows glowing with the warm light of lives being lived in small spaces. With big hearts, Sarah pointed to the 3rd floor. "That's me." "Thank you, Marcus. Really. This was very kind." Marcus nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Sarah opened the door, then paused. I hope you have a good night. Whatever you're looking for, I hope you find it. She disappeared into the building, leaving Marcus sitting in his car in the rain, wondering how she had known he was searching for something at all. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse apartment overlooking the city, watching rain trace patterns down floor-to-ceiling windows, and couldn't stop seeing Sarah's face, the quiet strength in her eyes, the way she had offered her last $5 without hesitation. Emma's voice whispered in his memory, telling him that some people were worth knowing, worth fighting for, worth the risk of feeling again. By morning, he had made calls. Marcus Chen had resources that money and influence provided, connections that stretched through the city's fabric like invisible threads. He wasn't proud of using them, but he needed to know if what he had seen was real or just a performance, another illusion in a world full of them. What he discovered made him ashamed of his doubt. Sarah Mitchell had been accepted to State University 7 years ago with a full academic scholarship for mathematics. She had declined it 3 days before classes started when her father died suddenly of a heart attack and her mother's condition worsened. No college, no degree, just a 18-year-old girl who chose family over future without apparent hesitation. Her current employer at Rosie's Diner, a woman named Helen, spoke of Sarah with maternal affection. That girl is sunshine itself, Helen had said over the phone. Never late, never complains, always has a kind word for everyone. Tips the cooks from her own pocket when they're having rough days. The cleaning company supervisor called her the most reliable employee in 20 years. The parents whose children she tutored sent emails filled with gratitude, describing how Sarah stayed late without charging extra, how she encouraged struggling students with genuine warmth, how their kids actually looked forward to math because of her. Her neighbors in the worn apartment building painted a picture of someone who checked on elderly residents, who babysat for free when single mothers had emergencies, who shared groceries when her own cupboards were nearly bare. Sarah Mitchell was beloved not because she tried to be, but because kindness was simply who she was. The surgery her mother needed cost $80,000. Sarah had saved $11,000 over 2 years. At her current rate, it would take 13 more years. Her mother didn't have 13 years. Marcus sat in his office at Lumière as dawn broke over the city, Pierre's words from the previous night echoing in his mind. Sometimes kindness finds us when we need it most. He picked up his phone and began making different calls. He had a plan. The call came on Tuesday morning while Sarah was scrubbing floors in an executive office, her knees aching against cold tile. The voice on the other end was professional, female, with the crisp efficiency of someone used to making important offers. Miss Mitchell? My name is Catherine Wells. I'm calling on behalf of the owner of Lumière restaurant. Sarah's hand froze mid-scrub, her heart suddenly racing. She stood slowly, phone pressed to her ear, confusion flooding through her. Yes? We would like to offer you a position as assistant manager. The salary is $75,000 annually, with full benefits including health insurance that covers family members. The position starts immediately if you're interested. Sarah's legs felt weak. $75,000, that was more than all 3 of her jobs combined. More than enough to pay for her mother's surgery. More than she had dared to dream of earning in years. This doesn't make sense. Her voice was cautious, protective. I don't have management experience. I'm a waitress. Catherine's tone remained pleasant but firm. The owner believes you have exactly the qualities we need: leadership, integrity, genuine care for people. He was very specific that we contact you. Sarah's skepticism crystallized into understanding, and with it came a wave of humiliation that burned hotter than gratitude. This is charity. Someone saw what happened Friday night, didn't they? With my date. This is pity. Miss Mitchell, I assure you, this is a legitimate position. We need someone who understands hospitality from the ground up, someone who treats people with respect regardless of their status. The owner was quite insistent. No. The word came out harder than Sarah intended. Please thank whoever this is. But I don't accept handouts. I work for what I have. I always have. Catherine paused, and when she spoke again, her voice held a different quality, something softer. The owner said you might say that. He asked me to tell you that he saw something special in you, not your circumstances, not your situation, you, your character. And that Lumière would be lucky to have someone like you shaping the experience for our guests. He said that if Emma were here, she would have insisted on it. Sarah's breath caught. Who is Emma? Catherine's voice grew quiet. Someone he lost. Someone who believed that the right people make all the difference. Will you at least come in for an interview? No obligations. Just a conversation. Sarah looked around the office she was cleaning, at her raw hands and her future stretching out in endless shifts and impossible math. She thought of her mother's labored breathing. She thought of her own stubborn pride, and whether it was worth more than her mother's life. When Sarah arrived at Lumière's employee entrance 20 minutes early on Monday morning, her heart hammering against her ribs with equal parts terror and determination. She wore her best outfit, the same navy dress from the disastrous date, freshly pressed and paired with shoes she had polished until they almost looked new. Her hands trembled as she pushed through the door, stepping into a world that still felt impossibly beyond her reach. Pierre greeted her with the same gentle dignity he had shown that awful Friday night, his smile genuine and warm. "Welcome, Miss Sarah. We are very pleased to have you." He didn't mention the $5. Didn't reference the humiliation she had endured at this very establishment. He simply treated her as if she belonged, and that small act of grace steadied her shaking hands. The training began immediately. Pierre walked her through the restaurant's operations with patient thoroughness, explaining reservation systems and seating arrangements, wine selections, and kitchen timing. But what struck Sarah most was how he spoke about the work itself. "This is not just food and service," he explained, his French accent lending weight to the words. "This is creating moments that people remember, making someone feel seen, feel valued." Sarah understood immediately. This was what she had been doing her entire life. In diners and tutoring sessions and neighborly gestures, she just hadn't known it had a name. By noon, she was greeting arriving staff members with warmth that came naturally, learning names and asking questions that showed genuine interest. The sous chef, a woman named Maria, mentioned her daughter's upcoming quinceañera, and Sarah spent 10 minutes discussing decoration ideas with the same enthusiasm she would have given her own celebration. The servers noticed. The kitchen staff noticed. By evening service, when Sarah took her position near the host stand to observe the dinner rush, something remarkable began to happen. Her presence changed the atmosphere. Guests responded to her warm smile, her genuine interest in making their experience special. When an elderly couple mentioned it was their 50th anniversary, Sarah quietly arranged for champagne and dessert, comping it from a discretionary fund Pierre showed her. When a nervous young man came in for a job interview dinner, Sarah seated him at the best table and whispered encouragement that he would do great. From his usual booth, hidden behind the velvet curtain, Marcus watched it all unfold. He saw his staff gravitate toward Sarah, like flowers turning toward Sunday. He saw customers leave with smiles that had nothing to do with the food, and everything to do with feeling genuinely cared for. Emma had been right, as she always was. The right person could transform a space. Sarah Mitchell was transforming his restaurant. And in doing so, she was transforming something in him he thought had died 2 years ago. 3 weeks into her new position, Sarah found herself genuinely happy for the first time in years. The work was demanding but fulfilling. The staff had become like family, and her mother's surgery was scheduled for next month thanks to the health insurance that had kicked in immediately. But one question nagged at her consciousness like a persistent melody she couldn't quite place. Who was the owner who had changed her life? She asked Pierre one quiet afternoon while they prepared for evening service, folding napkins into elegant shapes that looked like swans. Pierre's hands stilled for just a moment. Monsieur Chen is a very private man. His eyes held a sadness that suggested deep loyalty. He built this restaurant with his wife, Emma. They dreamed of creating something beautiful together. Then she died 2 years ago in an accident, and he has not been the same since. Sarah's chest tightened with recognition. The grief she heard in Pierre's voice was one she understood, having watched it consume her mother after her father's death. What was she like? Pierre's expression softened into something almost reverent. Like sunshine. She believed that food could bring people together, that hospitality was about making people feel truly seen. Everything here, the way we train, the way we treat guests, it is her philosophy. Monsieur Chen keeps it alive for her. Maria, the sous chef, joined the conversation while checking the evening specials. He watches sometimes. From that booth, in the corner, she nodded toward the velvet curtain Sarah had never seen pulled back. Never interferes, just watches, making sure we honor what they built together. Sarah looked at the mysterious booth, feeling a strange pull toward it. Does he ever come out? Talk to guests? Not anymore. Pierre's voice was gentle. He stays in the shadows. Perhaps it hurts too much to be part of the world they were supposed to share. Over the following days, Sarah became increasingly aware of that curtained booth during evening service. Sometimes she sensed movement behind the velvet, a presence observing. She found herself performing her duties with extra care during those moments. Wanting this invisible benefactor to know his faith in her wasn't misplaced. But more than that, she wanted to thank him, to tell him that his kindness had saved not just her, but her mother. That his decision to see something worthwhile in a humiliated woman at a table had given them both a future. She asked Catherine Wells, the assistant who had called her, how she might arrange a meeting. Catherine's response was kind but firm. Mr. Chen isn't taking meetings currently, but he knows you're grateful. That's enough for him. It wasn't enough for Sarah. Some debts couldn't be left unpaid. Thursday night, 3 weeks and 4 days after Sarah started at Lumière, she stayed late to help Pierre inventory the wine cellar. It was nearly 11 when she emerged, the dining room dark and empty, chairs upturned on tables like sleeping creatures. She was heading toward the employee exit when she noticed light spilling from beneath the kitchen door and heard the soft clatter of pots and pans. Curious, she pushed through the swinging door. The kitchen was a cathedral of stainless steel and shadow, and in the center of it stood a man she had never seen before. He was cooking with the focused intensity of someone performing a sacred ritual, his back to her, his shoulders bent over a pot that filled the air with the rich aroma of wine and herbs. She recognized the dish immediately from the menu. Coq au vin, Emma's signature recipe, Pierre had once mentioned. The one dish on the menu that never changed. Excuse me? Sarah's voice was soft, not wanting to startle him. The man turned, and Sarah found herself looking at the face from the car, from the rainy night. Marcus, the man who had given her a ride. But what was he doing here? Cooking alone in the closed kitchen. Marcus's expression flickered with surprise. Then, something else. Something vulnerable. Sarah. He set down his wooden spoon carefully. You're here late. She stepped closer, gesturing at the pot. I could say the same. Are you the night chef? Pierre never mentioned you worked here too. Marcus hesitated, standing at a crossroads between truth and the precious anonymity that allowed this moment to exist. He chose the latter. Something like that. I come in sometimes. When I need to think. Sarah nodded, understanding immediately. I do that too. Well, I did. At the diner where I used to work. There's something meditative about cooking when no one's watching. What are you making? It's an anniversary. Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. My wife's favorite dish. We got married 7 years ago today. She's gone now. I make this for her every year. The raw honesty in his words pierced through Sarah's chest. She moved closer, looking into the pot where chicken braised in burgundy wine, the sauce rich and complex. It smells beautiful. I'm sure she would have loved it. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and saw understanding in her eyes that came from her own grief. You lost someone too. My father. Sarah's smile was sad. 5 years ago. My mother is still here, but sometimes I see her missing him so much it's like losing him again every day. They stood in the quiet kitchen. Two people bound by loss and the strange comfort of being understood. And Marcus felt something he hadn't felt since Emma died. He felt less alone. The late-night encounters became a ritual neither of them named, but both anticipated. Sarah would find reasons to stay after closing, organizing storage rooms that didn't need organizing, reviewing schedules that were already perfect. Marcus would arrive in the kitchen around 11, and they would talk while he cooked dishes that never made it to the menu, recipes that existed only for the comfort of creation itself. He never corrected her assumption that he was a chef. The lie felt justified when she spoke to him with such unguarded honesty, treating him not as the wealthy owner who had rescued her but as an equal, someone who understood that grief and hope could exist in the same breath. Sarah told him about her dreams during their third late-night conversation, while he taught her how to properly dice onions without crying. "Someday, when my mother is healthy, I want to open a small cafe. Nothing fancy. Just a warm place where people feel welcome regardless of what's in their wallet." She laughed softly. "I know it sounds silly. It sounds perfect." Marcus's voice was sincere. "The world needs more places built on kindness rather than profit margins." She looked at him with surprise and gratitude, and he realized how rare it must be for someone to take her dreams seriously. Over the following weeks, Marcus shared carefully edited pieces of himself. He spoke about Emma without revealing the restaurant was his monument to her. He talked about loss and learning to live around the grief rather than through it. He confessed that he had stopped believing people could be genuinely good until recently, until someone had reminded him that kindness still existed in the world. Sarah understood he was talking about someone important and didn't press for details. The staff noticed, of course. Pierre watched his employer smile for the first time in 2 years. Maria saw Monsieur Chen laugh at something Sarah said while tasting a new sauce. They exchanged knowing glances and kept their silence, recognizing something precious growing between two wounded souls. One night, as they cleaned up after making fresh pasta neither of them would eat, Sarah's hand brushed Marcus's, reaching for the same towel. The contact lasted less than a second but felt like a doorway opening. She pulled back, suddenly shy. Marcus held very still, afraid to breathe, afraid to break whatever fragile thing was forming between them. Sarah smiled at him, soft and uncertain. "I'm glad you work here." Marcus smiled back, his heart aching with the weight of his deception. "So am I." The call came during Thursday evening service, 6 weeks into Sarah's tenure at Lumière. She was checking on table 12, laughing at something Pierre had said, when her phone vibrated in her pocket with the specific pattern she had programmed for the hospital. Her smile vanished. She stepped into the hallway, hand trembling as she answered. "Miss Mitchell, this is Dr. Patel. Your mother's condition has deteriorated rapidly. We need to perform the surgery within 48 hours, or we risk complete heart failure." The words that followed were clinical and devastating. Emergency procedure. Immediate admission. Cost increased due to the urgency and additional specialists required. Even with insurance covering 60%, Sarah would need $32,000. She had saved $14,000. The math was simple and impossible. $18,000 short. 48 hours to find it. Her mother's life measured in money she didn't have. Sarah ended the call and stood very still in the hallway. The sounds of the restaurant muffled and distant, then something inside her that had remained strong through every hardship, every humiliation, every endless shift, finally cracked. She slid down the wall and buried her face in her hands, sobs tearing from her chest with the force of years of holding everything together finally breaking apart. Marcus had come looking for her, wanting to share something about a new dessert idea, and found her collapsed in the hallway. The sound of her crying stopped him cold. "Sarah?" He knelt beside her, his hand hovering near her shoulder, wanting to comfort but uncertain if touch would help or intrude. She looked up, her face streaked with tears. Her eyes holding a despair he recognized from his own mirror after Emma died. "My mother. The surgery. They moved it up. I don't have enough money. Even with this job, with the insurance, I'm 18,000 short and she needs it now or she'll die." Marcus felt his heart shatter and reform in the space of those words. $18,000, an amount that meant nothing to him and everything to her. He could write a check right now, could save her mother with a signature, but if he did, she would know who he really was. know that everything between them had been built on deception. Their late-night talks would be tainted by the revelation that he had been the owner all along, watching her, hiding his identity while she trusted him with her authentic self. He could help her anonymously again, could route the money through channels that protected his secret. But was that kindness or cowardice? Sarah deserved the truth, but she also deserved her mother's life. Marcus made his choice. Marcus arranged the payment within an hour, routing $32,000 through a medical charity fund he controlled anonymously. The surgery was scheduled. Margaret Mitchell would live. Sarah would never know he was the one who saved her. Except Catherine Wells made a mistake, a small one. Mentioning Mr. Chen had personally expedited the paperwork for the charitable grant when she called Sarah with the good news. Sarah's world tilted on its axis. Chen. The owner's name was Chen. Marcus Chen. The chef who wasn't a chef. The friend who had been lying to her for 6 weeks. She arrived at Lumière during the pre-service prep, her face pale but composed in the way that only came from profound betrayal. She found him in his usual place, the kitchen, chopping vegetables with the careful precision she had grown to love watching. Marcus. Her voice was quiet, but he heard the steel beneath it. He turned, saw her expression, and knew immediately that the moment he had been dreading had arrived. Sarah, you're the owner. It wasn't a question. Marcus set down his knife slowly, his hand steady even as his heart raced. Yes, since the blind date. You've been watching me since that night. Since Brad humiliated me. Since I put my last $5 on the table like a fool. Her voice cracked on the last word. I trusted you. I told you things I've never told anyone. And you've been lying to me this entire time. Marcus stepped forward, then stopped when he saw her flinch. I never lied about anything that mattered. Every conversation we had was real. Every word I said was true. You just omitted that you owned the place. That you gave me this job out of pity. That you've been conducting some kind of experiment on the poor girl who couldn't afford dinner. Sarah's eyes blazed with tears and fury. No. Marcus's voice was raw with desperation. I gave you the job because you were extraordinary. Because in one evening you showed more grace and kindness than I'd seen in 2 years of watching people. I hid who I was because I was afraid you'd treat me differently, that you'd see the money instead of me. And you know what? Sarah gestured around the kitchen, her voice breaking. You were right. Because now I don't know what was real and what was charity. Marcus closed the distance between them, his own eyes wet. This, us, these nights, your laugh, the way you talk about your dreams, the way you made me feel alive again after 2 years of being dead inside. That was real. All of it. Sarah's anger held for one breath. 2, then crumbled like sand through fingers. She pressed her palms against her eyes, and when she lowered them, something had shifted in her expression. I knew. Her voice was barely a whisper. What? Part of me knew something was different about you. The way the staff looked at you. The way you moved through this place like you were haunting it. She laughed, the sound wet with tears. I just didn't want to admit it because then I'd have to admit that maybe this was all too good to be true. Marcus's breath caught. It is true. All of it. Sarah looked at him fully then, seeing past the deception to the broken man beneath. That night, with Brad. Those $5, that was literally the last money I had until payday. Bus fare home, money for my mother's medicine, everything. But I gave it to Pierre anyway because he was kind when I'd been treated like garbage. She stepped closer. I gave it freely, Marcus, not because I'm a saint. Because that's what my parents taught me. That kindness is the only thing we really own. Marcus felt something break open inside his chest. 2 years of carefully maintained walls collapsing under the weight of her words. Emma said the same thing. His voice shattered. The night she died, she had stopped to help a stranger change a tire. That's why she was on that road, why the drunk driver hit her. And I hated the world for it. Hated that her goodness got her killed. Stopped believing that people like her existed. The tears came then, unstoppable. 2 years of grief finally finding release. Until you gave away money you desperately needed. You work yourself to exhaustion for your mother. You treat everyone with dignity. You made me believe again that Emma was right, that kindness matters, that good people exist. Sarah closed the final distance between them and wrapped her arms around him, and Marcus collapsed into her embrace like a man who had been drowning finally reaching shore. They stood in the kitchen where they had cooked together, talked together, built something fragile and real together, and let themselves break and heal simultaneously. "I'm sorry I lied." Marcus's words muffled against her shoulder. "I'm sorry I was angry." Sarah's hands pressed against his back. They stayed like that. Two people who had lost so much, finding something worth keeping in each other, while the restaurant hummed with preparation around them and the world continued spinning outside. When they finally pulled apart, both tear-stained and raw, Sarah smiled. "So, you're my boss." Marcus laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "Technically." Sarah's smile widened. "That's going to make this complicated." Worth it, though. 3 months passed like the turning of seasons, winter giving way to spring, darkness yielding to light. Margaret Mitchell recovered from her surgery with the resilience of a woman who had raised a daughter to believe in miracles made of hard work and hope. She returned to the modest apartment stronger, her breathing steady, her heart literally and figuratively healed. Sarah stood at the entrance of Lumière one crisp morning. No longer the nervous woman clutching $5, but someone who belonged. She had become co-manager, working alongside Pierre to transform the restaurant into something even more beautiful than before. They had implemented kindness initiatives, scholarship programs for struggling hospitality students, pay what you can Sunday brunches that fed the community regardless of their means. Emma's dream. Expanded and honored. Marcus watched her from across the dining room, no longer hiding behind curtains but standing in the light beside her. Their relationship had grown slowly, carefully, like a garden tended by two people who understood that the most precious things required patience. They held hands during late-night conversations, shared quiet smiles across busy dinner services, took walks through the city where they had both felt so alone. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was something better. It was real. On the wall behind the host stand, in a simple silver frame, hung 5 $1 bills mounted on velvet. The plaque beneath read, "Kindness costs nothing, but means everything. Emma Chen and Sarah Mitchell." Customers asked about it constantly, and Sarah told them the truth, that these $5 had changed 2 lives, had bridged the gap between despair and hope, had proven that human goodness still existed in a world that often forgot. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest ripples. A woman gave her last $5 as a gesture of gratitude, never knowing it would lead to love, to healing, to a future she never dared imagine. A man watched from the shadows, his heart broken, searching for proof that goodness survived, and found it in her gentle courage. We all have $5 to give, metaphorically speaking. A kind word, a moment of compassion. The decision to see someone's worth beyond their circumstances. What will you do with yours? If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to believe in kindness today. Leave a comment telling us what you would have done in Sarah's place. And remember, the world changes one small act at a time.